Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this Egmont webinar on risks and opportunities in a free and open Indo-Pacific. As you may have guessed by our delay in starting, we're running into some technical issues with our guest speaker, but this is just to inform you that we will be starting shortly. As soon as everything is set, we will get going, of course. Wonderful. Our guest of honor has arrived.
I'm sorry.
No worries whatsoever, Masashi. Good to see you again.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you loud and clear.
Okay.
We are already live, so I'm delighted that quite a few people are taking time out of their Friday afternoon schedule, even in Brussels, where it's actually a sunny afternoon as we speak, to join us for this conversation on risks and opportunities in a free and open Indo-Pacific. We will be sharing some slide materials as we start, but let me perhaps first formally introduce you to our speakers. So, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear members of the audience, it's a pleasure to welcome you at this Egmont webinar on risks and opportunities in a free and open Indo-Pacific. My name is Alexander Matelaar. I'm a senior research fellow at Egmont, and I'll have the pleasure and honor of acting as a master of ceremony in today's proceedings. I'm delighted that for this topic we are joined by two distinguished guests and speakers. On the one hand, first, we will have Masashi Murano, who is a Japan Chair Fellow at the Hudson Institute, where he covers US-Japan defense cooperation and deterrence analysis. We're also joined by Philip Shetler-Jones, a long-standing observer of Europe, East Asia relations. Philip is currently working on a project that is funded by the German Agency for International Cooperation on enhancing European security cooperation in and with Asia. He's also a fellow at the Council on European Geostrategy and has kindly agreed to act as discussant at today's event. And just to set the scene, in Europe, both in Brussels and other European capitals, interest in all Indo-Pacific related things has been rapidly on the increase in recent months and years. A number of EU member states have in recent years adopted Indo-Pacific strategy documents, also in consultation and dialogue with partners in the region, such as Japan and the Republic of Korea. And only a few months ago, the European Union itself, at the initiative of the European External Action Service, has also adopted a strategy paper on the Indo-Pacific. And one of the key characteristics of that document is that it does signal an interest and an appetite for the European Union to engage with Indo-Pacific dynamics, regional dynamics. And at the same time, it only offers a very limited amount of detail with respect to the security dynamics that are present in the region. And it's against that background that we are so happy to host this webinar with reputable speakers such as Masashi Morano and Philip Shetler-Jones to shed some light on the risks that are present, as well as the opportunities in this notion of a free and open Indo-Pacific. So that by way of introduction. Just the rules of the game are pretty straightforward. This is a conversation that takes place on the record. We do intend to post the video recording of today's session on our Egmont YouTube channel afterwards. For everyone in the audience who wishes to engage, there will be time for Q&A, obviously, and you can post your comments and remarks in the chat box that we can all see. So we will collect your questions and comments in writing, and then in function of the available time, have a few rounds of Q&A and debates after the kickoff remarks. So let me just upload the visual materials that Masashi has just sent in. I think that should be coming online for you all to see now. Is that are the slides visible at present?
Yes, I can.
All right, perfect. Then Masashi, the floor is yours. Do let me know if I need to flip from one slide to the next whenever you're ready.
Well, all right. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. First of all, I would like to thanks to the Egmont Institute for giving me this opportunity. As Dr. Matt Lauer just mentioned now, the importance of the Indo-Pacific region is in the global geopolitics and geoeconomics is growing enormously today. There are many opportunities that abound in this rapidly developing region. These opportunities are not only for our physical neighboring countries, such as Japan and other Asian countries, but are also opening the United States, Europe, and other countries. However, in order to access these opportunities and benefits, in order to access these opportunities and benefits, in the Pacific region needs to be more than just geographic space or sphere. It means that it needs to be the safe space where free and open value and principles are mentioned. This means that along with the many opportunities that exist in this region, there are also risks that may cause those opportunities to be lost. And these risks are not unique to the Indo-Pacific, but have cross-regional impacts and cross-regional implications. So today I would like to talk about the risks and opportunities in the Pacific from a Japanese perspective. At first, Japan's the Free and Open Indo-Pacific initiative or concept was the first mentioned by the former Prime Minister Abe in his speech in Kenya in 2016. However, its origins go back to the first term of the Abe administration when he addressed the Parliament of India in 2007. At that time, Prime Minister Abe mentioned the confluence of two seas. That needless to say, the two seas here refers to the one is Indian Ocean and the another one is the Pacific Ocean. As shown in this slide, you can see it now. If we look at the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean as a single integrated region, that we can see that the region includes the two continents. The one is Asia, which is growing rapidly, and another one is the Africa, which has a lot of potential. So the Indo-Pacific region holds half of the world's population and is the engine of global economic growth. And in addition, historically speaking, this region is familiar to Japan because this is because the route from the Middle East to the Indian Ocean and through from the South China Sea and Taiwan, there has been an important energy supply line since the Cold War. And at the same time, the cooperation and support for ASEAN countries has been important factors in economic development. From the perspective of the United States, on the other side of the Pacific Ocean from Japan, has also recognized the importance of the region and has continued to work closely together between US and Japan. For example, during the Cold War, the United States and Japan have conducted joint studies for the defense of sea lane communications. And the more closer in recently, in 2018, the US Indo-Pacific Command was renamed the Indo-Pacific Command. However, the importance of this region is now growing for Europe. For example, 1/3 of world trade and 40% of Europe's foreign trade passes through the South China Sea. So I will talk a little bit more the detail about this instability of the risks of instability in security environment in Asia later. But therefore, if the peace and stability and in the Pacific region is disturbed, the stakeholders like us, all stakeholders, that will suffer many disadvantages, both politically and economically. Please, next slide. Thank you. Japan's approaches to the realization, Japan's approach to the realization of a free and open in the Pacific consists of the three pillars. The first is promotion of the fundamental values and principles, which includes the rule of laws and freedom of navigation and free trade. The second is the pursuit of the economic prosperity, including through the improvement of connectivities. In this context, this connectivity here includes the physical connectivity through the support for the development of quality infrastructure development, such as ports, railroads, roads, energy, and the information communication and technology like 5Gs. There are also the people-to-people connectivities through the human resource development, and then the institutional connectivity, that means that facilitating customs, among others. It also includes strengthening the economic partnerships, including the FTAs and EPAs. And third, that is ensuring the peace and stability, which means the security-related efforts. This includes the capacity building for regional countries, coast guards, and cooperation in the areas such as the humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, the anti-piracy or counter-piracy operations, as well as non-proliferation issues in this region. And also, the Japanese government has also repeatedly stated that this concept, free and open in the Pacific concept, is neither exclusive nor opposed to any particular specific regional concept or strategy. However, it is a case of sharing the value and principles of free and open. If there are challenges, potential challenges, who wants to make the Indo-Pacific a restricted and closed region, we must protect the rule-based security order from these potential challenges. So since my specific field is the traditional security issues, I would like to discuss in some more details the security challenges we faced in promoting free and open in the Pacific concept. Please go into the next slide. The security environment in the Indo-Pacific, where the US, with its allies, including Japan, and China encounter each other, that is sometimes described as a risky situation that could lead to the arms race. There are some people that describe this situation as so-called a security dilemma or Thucydides trap. However, I think that it is not appropriate to use the discussion of security dilemmas to explain this regional security environment in Indo-Pacific. The security dilemma, getting back to the origin, the definition of the security dilemma, its definition as a spiral model of an unexpected arms race that occurs even though no side really desires it. But on this slide, shows that it is clear that Chinese military expansion and their activities over the past 20 years and not reaction to Japan's defense posture and Japan's defense strategy. For instance, from the late 1990s to 2012, Japan's defense expenditure was almost flat. This current slide describes as the green line. Our defense spending was almost flat or even declining. Since 2012, following the inauguration of the second Abe administration, Japan's defense expenditure has grown. But this growth rate is about just 1% a year, and it is marginal compared to the Chinese defense spending growth, which for the FY 2020 increased by the 5.2% over the previous years. It's now that there's a comparison with from 2010 in this slide. The Chinese expenditure is almost more than double. So it's described at the red line. In addition, before that, the COVID-19 pandemic, diplomatic relations between Japan and China were on an improving trend with a state visit by President Xi Jinping, scheduled for the spring of 2020. But Chinese Coast Guard and Chinese Navy vessels, they have been increasingly active in the East China Sea. In other words, even if diplomatic relations between Japan and China improve, Chinese military and paramilitary activities have become more active. Please, next slide. So let's look at a few more specific examples. The first, the size of Chinese Coast Guard is already more than double than that of the Japanese Coast Guard. The second, some of the Chinese Coast Guard vessels have been converted from the Chinese Navy frigates. And so they're superior to the Japanese Coast Guard patrol vessels in terms of their firepower and protection capabilities. And the third, as China are doing in the South China Sea, Chinese Coast Guard vessels are chasing Japanese fishing boats around in Japanese territorial waters. So needless to say, Chinese Coast Guard has become the largest presence as a maritime law enforcement agencies in this region. So behind these actions, the objective of China to assert its own sovereignty by undermining the Japanese administrative control and the neighboring countries' administrative control in the South China Sea. So these activities are not innocent passage as allowed by international law. The Chinese Coast Guard law, which was implemented in this February, gives that the Chinese Coast Guard the authority to deviate from the scope of UNCLOS and sets ambiguous standards for use of force and excessive over maritime claim. And in other words, the Chinese Coast Guard law is one of an evidence of the Chinese willingness to use force in order to change the status quo in the East China Sea by the gray zone tactics. So as we may already know that this methodological assertion of sovereignties is not only happening in Asia. You know, just last week, the UK's Royal Navy, the destroyer navigating the innocently in the Black Sea, the south of the Crimean Peninsula, to be exact, they received a warning from Russian military and the paramilitary forces. So they not only claim that illegally occupied the territorial waters of Crimea, but also tried to disrupt the innocent passage by the UK Royal Navy destroyer. So I am not sure yet if these actions were intentionally coordinated with the Russia and China, but one thing I can say that the Russia's behavior in the ocean or maritime domain is beginning to resemble Chinese behavior in the Chinese behavior in Indo-Pacific. Now, this is not good trends for us. So please remember what I said earlier. Our security dilemma is an anticipated escalation spiral model of military expansion. But this unstable situation that we are experiencing in the Indo-Pacific region is not an unexpected arms race spiral, like a security dilemma. So because of if China's military buildup, there is not a reaction of action of US-Japan alliance, that no matter how much diplomatic communication improves, there will be a fundamentally competitive relationship between the US-Japan alliance and China. So during the peacetime and the gray zone, the Japanese Coast Guard and the Japanese self-defense forces, they must conduct presence patrols to dynamically deter the Chinese opportunistic expansion. However, when considering the seamless escalation control from low intensity aggressions to high intensity conflicts, the forward presence to address the anti-access area denial threats needs to be deployed by this distributed manner. So these competing operational demands, the complicated how to combine the best mix of defense posture and portfolio and its direction. The Japanese defense community has been tackled on the difficult competing programs of how to figure out the most appropriate solution to this competing demands since around 2010. But to be honest, the complex nature of this problem has not been seriously understood in the West at that time. However, that situation drastically changed after in 2014, which means that after the Crimean crisis. As we realized that at that time, the gray zone or hybrid warfare are not confined to the gray zone or pre-war level alone. What I mean by this is the potential challengers believe that they can better compete at the gray zone level by the casting conventional shadow or nuclear shadow. So therefore, that our counter-escalation strategy needs to be considered as an integrated and from the gray zone to conventional and through ultimately the nuclear level. And in addition to the allies needs to discuss in advance the various operational scenarios for the policy decision making, such as whether it is better to maintain ambiguity to complicate Chinese calculations, or to draw the clear red line and send a clear deterrent signal to them. So if this trend continues, Japan's Coast Guard will eventually be overrun and saturated by Chinese Coast Guard and their Navy vessels. So if this happens, Japan may be forced to deploy the maritime self-defense forces first. So even if this situation happens, I hope the international community will understand that Japan has not taken any illegal aggressive actions. And China is deliberately keeping the confrontation at the gray zone level because if it gets into the conventional conflict with Japan, it will trigger US military intervention under Article 5 of the US-Japan Security Treaty. So if so, then carefully calculated messaging the risk of the potential escalation on the part of US and Japan may be necessary to restrain China's gray zone aggression. So for this happen, Japan needs to be international community to support us as a status quo, as a status quo power, standing together. So from this kind of the context, we can comparing and we can share our own experience and our lessons in what's happening in the Indo-Pacific region and in Europe. So I would like to discuss further at the upcoming Q&A and the discussion sessions. I'll stop here. Thank you very much for attention.
Thank you very much for that that expose, Masashi, going from the background to the background to how the free and open Indo-Pacific concept came into being, to the challenges that it now faces at sea in particular. Philip, may I offer you the opportunity to throw in some comments? You have been commenting on dynamics in the Indo-Pacific region for a long time, zooming in also on the relative presence of different European players in the region. What's your thinking on where this debate now stands, and also your thoughts on the ideas put forward by Masashi?
Thank you, Alexander, and thank you, Masashi, for your points. I will take my lead really from the structure that you indicated, looking at the opportunities and the risks, and then some conclusions or perhaps recommendations before we go to Q&A. It's a very timely question, I think, because we are at a moment when it comes to the European perspective where the interest in the region has gone up, and there is a willingness to go to the region more and think more about the politics and security of the region and what it means for Europe. But there are some choices in front of us which are emerging, which are confronting us with some difficult questions and some points that we need to think about carefully. So I'm going to try to make a few points that try and bring out what I think are interesting there. So starting with the opportunities, I think we see an opportunity when we consider what to do in the Indo-Pacific to lock in the gains that we have achieved in the post-war world of a global system that's open rather than divided in the post-Cold War world. There are some threats to that open world by the reemergence of blocks or concepts like dual circulation that threaten to put up barriers into this open world system. I think, though, the system still has a majority of world opinion in favor of it. Yet it is shifting in some places where people see protection and geopolitics justifying some controls and barriers in the open system. Second opportunity is to reinforce an order where we settle our disputes peacefully according to a legal framework and inclusive institutions. We've built these institutions over a long period at a great cost, and we all have a shared interest in preserving them. I'm thinking of institutions like the UN Convention on Law of the Sea, which I think, judging by all of the states who've signed up to it and quote it when they need to, still commands a lot of support. These principles like sovereign equality, peaceful resolution of disputes, non-interference, they've been on the books since the UN Charter, some of them before. They've been updated, like with UNCLOS more recently, but still it's not enough for everybody. So on top of that, we see new institutions coming to deter aggression and make alliances more resilient against bullying and different kinds of coercion, economic coercion. So we have had new institutions on trade and investment like CPTPP. We have new institutions which are more on the security side like the Quad, India, Australia, Japan, and US. And the Shanghai Cooperation Organization has also slowly built up its range of activities and its membership. In different ways, these are not straightforward institutions for European countries or the European Union to join in with as members, but they're very important factors on the landscape we have to work with. So then there is a need maybe to move from strictly military collective defense to some mechanisms which underpin economic solidarity and collective defense when it comes to economic coercion and trade bullying. Again, this is something that gets right into some of the basic functions of the European Union as a body formed very much to create a single market and to unite the power of its members when it comes to international trade and investment. So again, not an easy sync with some of these other institutions. Lastly, the opportunity is for a world where societies, their members enjoy individual freedom, and those societies are mutually supportive in fostering the best of human achievement. This is still an attractive norm, I think, and value, judging from the struggles of especially young people in places like Hong Kong, in Thailand, in Myanmar. There's clearly a lot of evidence that these are not Western values. These individual values of freedom are shared with many of our friends in Asia as well. And yet they are also under pressure. We can name some countries where people are suffering for claiming their rights of individual freedom and human rights. So some of the risks I've talked about, but let's identify, the biggest change, which is a source of risk, which is the extension of the reach and say of the People's Republic of China in the region as it grows in economic and military power, asserting claims in the South China Sea, commitment to absorb Taiwan, and not ruling out the use of force to achieve that. I think this is backed by a belief that there is a decline in the United States power, and China, under the People's Republic of China, has the destiny to regain its status as first in the region, if not beyond. The US, though, is not backing down. So there's obviously a kind of unavoidable clash of interests and ambitions in the region. There is a tendency for some to hedge their bets and not pick a side and be forced into a new kind of Cold War confrontation. In some ways, the members of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, have historically sought to maintain their own freedom of choice and independence from Cold War pressures, and that pattern is also coming back. In some ways, Russia and some voices in Europe also see this as a competition they would rather stand aside from, or even perhaps benefit from, by playing the sides off against one another, rather than joining in on one side or the other. So there is for those who wish to create a kind of broad alliance to counter what they see as the unjust extension of People's Republic of China influence, they have a choice. I suppose one option looks like an alliance built against domination by countries seeking to change the status quo by force. And then if you take this geopolitical design, you include a lot of countries that maybe don't share your values and don't share the political system of democratic representation, human rights, etc. Then you have a larger coalition with more power, but it's not so much for the values as against an identified opponent. The second option is an alliance which is more for democratic values. This would be a smaller alliance with less power, but may have more power to mobilize domestic support within the societies that it would need to actually pull together as a group. I think that question of whether, it comes up in issues like the idea of a D10, a group of 10 democracies, or alliances where values and the political systems are not highlighted as the main membership criteria. Instead, it's about being like-minded in certain areas where maybe, again, China is very much in the frame. So the other challenge, I think, is that in the West, because of the type of relationship between private sector and government, we don't have an equivalent or an answer to the Belt and Road Initiative and some of these big ideas that are coming from China. And there is still work going into various options to counter this. But people in the region are asking whether the West and America or Europe are serious in coming with the money for these projects on the same scale as the People's Republic is able to. The other risk or doubt, I think, is about the staying power and commitment of the United States in the region. Since the US alliance system has been the main structure of security in East Asia for much of the last 70 years, and certainly the post-Cold War period, people look at the support for Donald Trump and the close result of the last election and wonder whether another president after Joe Biden might come back with more America first policies. And then there is the question of America maintaining its lead in military equipment and operational capacity, as China and other countries, as you showed, Masashi, are investing a lot more in their own defense. So if not US leadership, then what's the alternative? What can middle powers do? So here, I guess we are into some of the conclusions about Japan and European countries, and where we might find interest in supporting this free and open Indo-Pacific idea. For Japan, I think, and Europe, we have a shared interest in a more obvious European presence and commitment in the region. From the point of view of Japan, I think this can offer ways to enhance deterrence in the region by showing that there are more countries and more partners present who may be prevailed on, or may see in their interest to support Japan and other countries seeking to defend their territory and their freedoms against any kind of interference. And it would be important not so much only in the military dimension, but also to have the understanding and the assistance, if necessary, from some of the big economies in Europe. If, as in many cases of this scale of confrontation, the long struggle, if you like, is more one of economic competition and coercion, rather than just quick military strikes and operations. For Europeans, I think a more high-profile presence is desirable, because the European Union and European countries want to sometimes show that they offer an alternative. They don't want to be themselves a victim of a two-block world where they are left out and their own way of life and their preferences on trade are excluded or just overrun. So they want to also show that they are more than economic actors. And that's why I think you see now more military engagement from Europe. I also think that some countries from Europe see this as an opportunity to exhibit their value as allies in the context of the transatlantic relationship with the United States. If this is the #1 theater from the United States policy point of view, then it's important for Europeans who rely on the United States for their defense and value the NATO alliance. The last point I make is a difficulty, I think, of the Indo-Pacific concept for Europe. It's such a huge area, as you showed on that map, Sashi. And I think for Japan, it makes sense because it connects the Middle East and Africa with Asia, East Asia, and it connects the lines of communication, energy, and many other forms of trade and exchange. For the United States, it makes sense because it also brings India into the frame, and India is the big country in the region that could make a big difference in balancing the People's Republic of China. Same for Australia and some of the other countries who have promoted the idea of Indo-Pacific. But I think from a European perspective, Indo-Pacific is really made up of 4 distinct areas, and different members of the European region and organizations have a different perspective on those. So, for example, for France, having territories in the Indian Ocean, territories in the South Pacific, these parts are very important, and by extension, they are European Union territory. The third area is, I suppose, the Southeast Asia area covered by ASEAN. That draws the attention naturally of the European Union and its institutions, because in some ways ASEAN may present a counterpart for the European Union as an international body that they have some affinities with. And then there is the fourth area, Northeast Asia, which is the most distant geographically, and also the most difficult because of the security dynamics you described. Problems of the nuclear program of DPRK, the territorial disputes on the islands, the risk of conflict over Taiwan and in the Taiwan Strait, the South China Sea. These are the most difficult areas because they're the areas where, from a European perspective, it's hardest to have an influence and they're furthest away. And it will be interesting, therefore, in the coming months as we watch the European Union's Indo-Pacific cooperation strategy being refined and developed, how among these 4 areas, Indian Ocean, South Pacific, ASEAN, Northeast Asia, where the balance of effort and the different types of engagement emerge. Thank you. I think I'll leave it there, Alexander, if it's okay, and we can look forward to some Q&A.
Excellent. Many thanks for these thought-provoking observations, Philip. We'll open the Q&A. So I see there are quite a few knowledgeable attendees in our audience. So ladies and gentlemen, do feel free to pitch in with your comments and questions via the chat. Perhaps to get things going, there's actually one big question that is jumping to my mind, which I will frame differently for each of you, and that relates to European naval presence in the region, which did feature as an idea in the EU's Indo-Pacific strategy document, without being developed in great detail. So perhaps raising this question to Masashi's interest, would European naval presence in the region offer any sort of important difference from your point of view with respect to the sort of territorial dynamics that you have outlined pertaining to the Senkaku Islands, but also more broadly? Does the presence of a few European vessels make any major difference in that regard? And turning the same question to Philip, from a European perspective, with the state of European navies being what they are, do European navies have the reach and the capacity to engage in that kind of mission? And what are your thoughts on how European nations can go about making the most productive use of the naval assets they have at their disposal? That by way of opening the Q&A. As I already said, for everyone in the audience, do feel free to pitch in with additional comments and questions via the chat box. But perhaps let's first zoom in on that idea of European naval presence in the Indo-Pacific.
Thank you very much for the great comment and the questions. The impact of the naval presence of the Indo-Pacific region, I think that it has a couple of important effects. And at the first, I'd like to explain to the U.S. and the Asian countries and its U.S. ally, part of its U.S. allies, how we expect to those kind of the presence. As already mentioned about the difficulties of first that I already pointed out the importance to deter the Chinese gray zone aggression or the opportunistic creeping expansion. We need to keep the visible presence, like with some visible forces, like it includes the aircraft carriers, actual destroyers, the passage to deny their illegal territorial claims. And so in that context, now that we already know that UK's the Queen Elizabeth, the aircraft carrier, now that they already started to the patrol to the Indo-Pacific, the oceans, and other countries like France and Germany and other a couple of the European countries already deployed or dispatched the vessels to this region to showing their presence. Of course, I've already pointed out that we need to distinguish so that the roles and effectiveness of these presence in the peacetime or gray zone and some more high intensity conflict situation. Of course, even in the US aircraft carrier or other major destroyers, it is hard to operate under the Chinese A280 bubble. So to survive those high value assets. However, keeping the peacetime presence, it has an impact to the rising the Chinese threshold to going to some conductors coming additional territorial claims or some behavior to change the status quo. So I think in that context, I think that the European naval presence in this region has a good opportunity to deter together and showing the collective resolve to deter the Chinese opportunistic aggression through our joint exercise and the more specific patrol activities. So, but at the same time, it has a limited, means that is still risky in involved the high intensity conflict. It is the comparison in the Japanese self-defense forces has not expected to involve some Baltic invasion scenario. So we don't expect each other, those kind of high intensity operations involved each other, but in the peacetime to gray zone, we can collaborate each other more broadly and to involve so many of the stakeholders to involve those kind of the situation. It's going to be more effective to maintain the stable situation in this region.
Shall I go ahead, Alexander?
Yeah, go ahead, Philip.
Well, I think this idea of a coordinated rotational presence came from the experience with counter-piracy operations in the Indian Ocean and the Gulf of Guinea, where it was possible to coordinate the movement of ships on a rotational basis, so you have a permanent presence. It's hinted at in the Foreign Affairs Council document on Indo-Pacific strategy as an area to be examined. I don't know whether it will be agreed in formal terms, because there are just a small number of European countries who have ships and infrastructure to reach that far. One of them, of course, the United Kingdom is now outside of the European Union. The others would be France, as we see. The Netherlands is sending a ship with the UK task force, and Germany is sending a frigate later this year. Italy has also a considerable navy, and other countries like Denmark or Norway, but haven't indicated yet an intention to deploy vessels to the area beyond the Indian Ocean, at least. So part of the question is, when we say Indo-Pacific rotational presence, which part are we talking about? Are we talking about the Indian Ocean, in which case it's possible? Or are we talking about one of those three other areas I mentioned? Northeast Asia, also possible. In fact, there is a very good framework available to accommodate that in the form of the actually American and Japanese led mission to monitor the enforcement of sanctions on the DPRK, the Enforcement Coordination Cell, where France and the UK have already participated, and Germany is, I think, considering joining as well. So that offers a UN mandated framework where European countries could go all the way to Northeast Asia and on a rotational basis make a European contribution to UN mandated, and then of course that means agreed by all permanent 5 members of the Council, including China, peace and security operation in the region. The other possibilities are the ship riding, as it's called, where you have officers or service people from different nations riding on the ship of one other friendly country. And so even if you have one European ship, you may have multiple European nations represented on it. You have then the question also, as Masashi pointed out, do you fit into the schedule of regional exercises, the 5-power defense agreements, the different exercises like Malabar with the Indians? There are more and more of these exercise choices, and there are also more and more trilateral arrangements being created all the time. India, France, US is just one of the latest ones. So there are definitely more occasions to lock into, but in terms of capacity, we still have quite a low limit on what can be sent that far. That's all from me.
Thank you both for picking up that that first question to break the ice. In the meantime, a question has come in from Michael Reiter in the chat. Michael Reiter is the former EU ambassador to the Republic of Korea, currently affiliated to the Brussels School of Governance as a distinguished professor for international security and diplomacy. And he raises the theme of connectivity as a potential area for common ground between the EU and Japan, the connectivity partnership. He asked, well, a joint open approach could perhaps build a bridge to China if there is agreement reached on joint standards, pointing out that, however, threat perceptions of China might be different between the EU and Japan, but he wonders whether they have any appetite for all-out competition with China. So the question is that common interest in connectivity sufficient for building common ground between the European Union and China in your respective views? Who would care to pick up on that one first?
Thank you very much for the question, Ambassador. I'm not this is not as my specific field, but I'd like to mention a little bit on these issues from more broader range of the perspective as traditional international politics and economy. I think that I think so. It could be has some potential possibility to really that the fundamentals to cooperate between EU and Japan to as one of the incentive to avoiding to the complete confrontation with China to making some common standards. But at the same time, I think that I can say that this situation would be how to define that the relationship with the not only bilateral relationship with between EU and Japan, but also it's a part of the context in the great power competition between US and China. As the field mentioned about what can we do to avoiding to the escalation and going to the new Cold War. I think that it's this debate, the concept of the Cold War can be defined in the various academic ways, but those who that say that today is a strategic competition between the US and China should not be viewed as a Cold War side. The factors such as the economic, the interdependence, is one of the major differences from the Cold War between US and Soviet Union. But the generation, like in the generation like me, I'm not the experience. I don't have any real-time experience in the Cold War. The existence of the economic interdependence with China is a given. So I don't believe that these will disappear completely. Even that the former Trump administration and the Biden administration tried to the partial decoupling with China. But it's not will disappear completely which means that economic dependence will not disappear, will disappear completely in the competitive era. So rather we are in the situation that where the major powers that cannot easily compromise. So if this is the essence of the Cold War, then I think that I believe that the current situation, current relationship between the U.S. and China is undeniably, this is a Cold War. And also here is the typical questions is the international political economy. Is economic interdependence better when it is strong, or is it better to be weak? The interdependence may create incentives to avoiding the decisive confrontation with each other, two major countries. And however, given that this is a long-term competition, and competition has already begun. So the less independence there is, the less to decreasing our vulnerabilities. So I think that the Biden administrations and try to decrease in their economic or the vulnerability to reconstruct their the economic and the technology supply chain. So it also has the competing demand there. So I agree with that try to make some common standards is one of the idea to cooperate with those countries, but also it has a kind of the difficult situation or trade-off situation there. That's my view. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm afraid this is also not an area where I really know enough to say anything very useful. But I think following on from one of Masashi's thoughts, in a geopolitical confrontation, you may see advantages in expanding the number of connections you have to create a diversity as a way of making your economy more resilient in the case of cutting off or squeezing of some of those channels of trade and investment and other things. So it can be a form of resilience against the risks of overdependence on one supplier. And if Japan and Europe found ways of diversifying the number of connections and channels between their regions across this huge area, Indo-Pacific, then Cold War or no Cold War, I mean, I think it holds advantages either way. But on the other hand, I sort of assume that the agreements that we have already on partnership and trade and so on would already encourage this. So I'm not sure what we add to the effort by using the word connectivity, but I could be missing something of the meaning of that term.
Thank you both. There is another issue I wanted to pick your brains on, as we also wait for further questions from the audience. Philip, you in your remarks, you also pointed out that from a European point of view, the Indo-Pacific actually covers different sub-regions. And you also made mention of France having a particular interest in of course looking after its own overseas territories, and only recently, some 2 weeks ago, the French Air Force was training its long-range strike capacity by sending some Rafales and refueling aircraft all the way directly from France to French Polynesia, landing in Tahiti, and then continuing afterwards onwards to Hawaii, if I'm not mistaken. Is that perhaps something that also plays into this, the direct material territorial interest of European players like France, perhaps also the UK, that comes in that category, and then spinning that same question to Masashi, from a deterrence point of view, given the long distances, what sort of confidence is there in Japan, in the Japanese security community in particular, that when push comes to shove, European actors do mean business when it comes to the Indo-Pacific?
So I think when you look at the position of France and its territories and its reach, it's really not typical of a European country. That's the first thing to remember. It's really an outlier with the UK in having territories in the region, populations in the region, legacies in the case of the UK with the Five Powers defense arrangements of being a member of a collective security organization in the region, and retaining the ability, as the UK did similarly with Japan, exercise Guardian North, where it sent fighter jets to interceptors to exercise with the Japan Air Self-Defense Force in 2018. There are very few European countries capable of doing this. So I think that's the first thing to remark on, is when you see the French and the UK, it's untypical. And I don't think that other European countries are aiming to have the same kind of capabilities and use their armed forces in that way. But I think that you'll continue to see it from a mixture of reasons, partly because it does involve European countries more credibly in the security agenda in the region, and also with partners like the United States. It also offers opportunities for marketing defense equipment. This is a global market, and countries like France and the UK are also keen to take opportunities to show the capabilities of the equipment and systems they're selling. So you can continue to expect to see it. It's not typical. I wouldn't expect other countries to be following in that pattern.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with the untypical characteristics of French defense posture in the region compared to other EU players in particular. Masashi, what are your thoughts on this?
Thank you. Actually, this is one of my the specific field. How should we consider on the issue of the power projections and its element of the one is distance, and the other issue of the other element is the speed or the rapidness. This problem, of course, that I already mentioned, and Philip also mentioned too, the expanding of the presence of the European countries has an increasing of the number of the opportunity to the joint exercise, and some or even the independent exercise, those kind of training to fly over the long range with the air refueling is one of effective in the peacetime or the gray zone. The why I've repeatedly the emphasis on those differences, those mean that the differences of the peacetime or gray zone situation or high intensity situations. Now that when we analyzing is the focus of the Chinese tactics or their strategy, they are basically try to exploiting the temporal advantages in Western Pacific, or it includes the Taiwan contingency scenarios. It's similar to the situation in the Russian Baltic invasion scenario or the Crimea scenario. They could use to the advantages of the closeness to the geographical or geopolitical distance between their mainland, and to demobilizing their forces rapidly and try to achieve some specific operational goals or operational objectives as a fait accompli. So before the US and others decide to intervene of this situation. So I don't want to underestimate to the importance of the presence from the Europe, but it's very effective in the peacetime to gray zone situation to showing their presence of a collective willingness or collective resolve to maintain the stability in this region. But at the same time, we need to care about how China and Russia try to do their series. We call the series of victory, which means that I've mentioned that they try to very quickly. Sometimes we call the short, sharp war. So they try to exploit their temporal advantages in both regions. So in that sense, the importance of how our side can gather to mobilize as soon as possible to deters and offsetting to those kind of their advantages. So in that context, sometimes already in security community in US and Japan's discussing about the importance of the forward presence and especially on some ground-based missile systems, because of those kind of systems using quickly when they try to change the status quo at once. So in that situation, those kind of rapidness is now one of the major trends is the security environment is the operational tempo going to be more faster than the 10 or 20 years before. So that point is the importance to comparing with the security situations. The element is the distance and the elements of the speed.
Yeah, no, I think that makes perfect sense, and there are types of debates that I think European strategic communities are less familiar with, primarily because the strategic tradition in Europe is more grounded and anchored in air-land type of thinking. Where distance and speed also play a role, but are in a way less challenging, and that's probably something that European and Japanese strategic thinkers can compare notes on how air-land thinking and air-sea thinking link up with one another, because that are sort of the different strategic traditions that are most familiar in the two different regions. let me perhaps remind the audience that questions are still welcome and can be raised in the chat. The discussion so far has touched on security dynamics as well as some economic aspects. Masashi, in your own presentation, there was also a detail that I perhaps wanted to return to. So you outlined, speaking about deterrence and counter escalation strategies, that there is a fundamental question whether it is better to maintain ambiguity, so to speak, to keep a maximum of response options open, or to engage in more explicit deterrence signaling by indicating clear red lines and a logic if A then B, so to speak. Can you perhaps elaborate a bit on how that dynamic plays out in the Japanese security community in particular, that you're most familiar with? And then I would perhaps also ask Philip whether that sort of debate is something that that can be recognizable from a European perspective.
Thank you. So, in my presentation, what I wanted to say, the differences, we should sending more clear signal, or drawing the clear deadline, or keeping in the ambiguity is one of the difficult or trade-off trade-off has a trade-off impact of to deter the Chinese and the opportunistic aggressions. And also, as the Dr. Matsunawa pointed out, the pro-con debate exists in the Japan's security community. Now, the one thought to maintain the ambiguity, or it is almost equal to keeping the situation, try to keep the situation under the before that actual war fighting or actual conflict, which means that we try to focus on increasing the number of the vessels of the Japanese Coast Guard, not maritime self-defense forces, because of it has a couple of reasons. Because of the to dispatching on the Coast Guard vessels, it has the impact to, or one of the messaging to here. This is our territory, not the outside of our territorial water. If we start to deploying to the maritime self-defense forces, or it's almost equivalent of the Japanese Navy, some other audience may recognize that it is the kind of conflict to do between Japan and China. So it is sometimes sometimes it's not appropriate to explaining the administrative control still our side, or we are still control the administration. However, it's the problem of the capacity, the balance of the capacity and our readiness, capacity, and capabilities. Of course, the Japanese Coast Guard vessels now is the most smaller than the number and the capabilities and protection capability. The weaker and the smaller than Chinese Coast Guard vessels. So actually that I've already mentioned, their Chinese Coast Guard vessels has been converted from the Chinese Navy frigates. So in that situation, they mean that the Japanese Coast Guard vessels and the sailors, has always faced the vulnerable situation. So in the some timing, if Japan, it is not the Japanese version of escalate to de-escalate strategy. I don't want to use the term of the escalation, but the stepping to the some next level from our side is one of it's sometimes kind of effective signal to avoiding the escalation, because of if we dispatching on the maritime self-defense forces as with the recognition of and the authorization of the use of force and under the under the use of force. It is one of the trigger to the Article 5 situation under the US-Japan Security Treaty. So it may invite to the US intervention. But Chinese side, they don't want to do the entrap these kind of situations. So if they thought about those risks, that is one of the idea from Japanese side. Try to the situations going to be the next stage. If we can compete more effectively in the next domain. So that is of course there has some trade-off. So we don't have. We mean that even in the Japanese security, the professional experts community doesn't have the consensus of which strategy, which tactics is going to be more effective to deter the Chinese opportunistic aggressions, and also not only the theoretical sort, but also we needed to consider about the operational reality of the maritime self-defense forces and the Japanese Coast Guard. So now in coming this fall or winter, I think that the Japanese government started to review process of the current national security strategy and national defense program guideline. It is one of the capstone document of Japan defense strategy. So we needed to discuss about further the how do we change, or how do you review the current operational standards of the East China Sea.
Thanks for that comprehensive answer, Masashi. Very, very thoughtful. Philip, over to you.
Yes, briefly, I think ambiguity is quite a natural position for people in Europe to position themselves when it comes to Asian security issues and deterrence against destabilizing or aggressive acts. Partly the reason is because, at least when it comes to the European Union, foreign policy is a product of consensus. And so it's not really possible to make a commitment in advance, even if one decided that was a good idea. It would still depend on a policy being supported on the day. Same really with countries like the UK who are outside the EU. And although in the case of the UK, we are a member of the five-power defense arrangement, we are not locked into a kind of Article 5 pattern in the same way that we are with NATO, or that Japan and the US are with their mutual security agreement. So I think ambiguity is the default position, really, when it comes to a European contribution to deterrence in Asia.
Right. Thank you very much. I think the European preference for ambiguity in a diplomatic logic is of course well known, with the pros and cons that engenders, so to speak. Right, ladies and gentlemen, we are already in overtime, so it is, I think, appropriate to gently start wrapping up. I would like to warmly thank our guest of honor, Masashi Murano, for his presentation and sharing his wealth of background with all of us. I think this is the kind of debate that, in terms of substance, we have all too little in Brussels. So it's good that we can sort of have these more contrarian type of inputs also feed into the Brussels think tank circuit. Also, a very big thank you to Philip Shetler-Jones for pitching in with his thoughts and remarks, indeed building on his long-standing trend of observing dynamics in the region and the sort of dynamic interplay between Europe and East Asia. On behalf of the Egmont Institute, I also want to thank everyone in the audience today for tuning in, even though it is a sunny Friday afternoon. The good news about the webinar format is that we can plug in speakers from wherever, from different physical locations. So this is not necessarily a fully anchored Brussels experience with our speakers tuning in from different places. But so happy that this could all take place. Thank you for a very stimulating and thought-provoking debate. And we look forward to continuing the conversation on Indo-Pacific matters at other occasions at Egmont in the not too distant future. Let me wish all of you a very pleasant remainder of the day and a good evening, a good weekend ahead, and I look forward to welcoming you and seeing you again after the summer, hopefully back in real life. We'll leave it at that. Masashi, Philip, thanks again so much for this stimulating debate. We look forward to continuing the discussion whenever the situation presents itself. Let's call it over and out, and have a great weekend, everyone.